Hi, it's Pete Cohen here and welcome to episode 148 of the Mi365 podcast series. Today's podcast is how to be like Bruce Lee. Now, whether you know who Bruce Lee is or not, by the end of this podcast, you will. I believe everyone needs mentors. Everyone needs people to look up to, whether they're dead or alive. And Bruce Lee is definitely one of the most inspirational people that I ever came across in my life. So in this podcast, I'm going to show you how to think like him, and I'm also going to show you how to take away some of the key things that he did to create the life and the success that he had. So get ready for another inspiring Mi365 podcast. Welcome to episode 148 of the Mi365 podcast series. Today's podcast, how to be like Bruce Lee. So who was Bruce Lee? Well, what I don't want to do in this podcast is to give you a history lesson about who he was. What I'd actually like to do is to take away some of the key teachings. In fact, I believe some of what I'm about to share with you would be some of the things that, if he was alive today, is some of the things that he would say to you. I personally believe that everybody needs people to look up to. Now, when many people think of Bruce Lee, they think of him as a martial artist. And one thing you could definitely go and do is go away. There's many documentaries on him, and I would seek out some of them and watch and see what you can take away from him, because he was so much more than just a martial artist. He was probably one of the best martial artists that has ever walked the face of the earth, but he was much more than that. He was a philosopher. Yes, he was an actor and a director and a photographer, but he was a philosopher, and he wanted to help people, and that's exactly what I want to do. I want to help you to be the very best that you can be, and that's what this Mi365 podcast is all about. It's about inspiring people to be better than their best every single day. It's also about making people realize, look, your future is unwritten and you've got the power to change. And unless you do something about your future will be very much like your past. And maybe that's great, but maybe you're the sort of person that just wants to get better. So I want to share with you right now some of the key things that Bruce Lee became hugely aware of. And one of them was about what you were working towards. He was working towards one thing. It's what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization, to be who you're really truly capable of being. In fact, the other day we watched the film called The Greatest Showman. It's a musical. I'm not normally a fan of musicals, but I must admit, it's a beautiful film, and it's based, I think, loosely on a true story. And I love this line in the film. There was a guy that basically grew up from a very humble family, and his father didn't have very much. His father passed away, and it's not that he had a chip on his shoulder. It was more that he wanted to be more than he was, and that was one of the lines he said. He said, "I just wanted to be more than what I was." And this is where I think so many of us go wrong, because then we start comparing ourselves to other people, and then often nothing is ever enough. What Bruce Lee realized is that to be who you really are is about addressing the greatness that lies within you and what you're capable of doing. So his key message was focus on self-actualizing and not self-image. For him, self-image is where you compare yourself to other people. And if you do that, you always fall short. In fact, Bruce Lee mastered this so much, his own self-actualizing, and to really work on his strengths, that he became so good at what he does. And this is what this is all really about. For you to be like Bruce Lee, it's to really work on mastery. So many people came to see him. So many people from all over the world, some of the greatest martial artists who did other forms of martial arts, came to see him because they recognized he was so good and they wanted to learn from him. And maybe a few people did actually learn from him. But so many people came to him because they wanted him to reveal the secrets. They almost wanted him to make their life better. And this is something I know a lot about from my own personal experience. In my 20s, diagnosed with chronic fatigue, diagnosed with ME, I basically burnt out big time. I didn't know how to really look after myself. I didn't know how to manage my energy. And I can tell you, I was looking for people to make me better. I was looking for a label, and I was looking, oh, he's got this, and I need to take this. I didn't really want to take responsibility for my own life. I wanted someone to make my life better. And I believe this is one of the key things that Bruce Lee recognized. And he actually developed 3 different schools all over the place, all over different parts of the States, different parts of California. And he eventually closed them down because he got sick and tired of being sick and tired about people looking for this magic bullet. And there was a magic bullet. It was you. And every single one of us, as we decide to get better at things. You see, mastery is something today that is frowned upon. I think people think it's a bit strange. If you got up every single day and you had rituals and routines that you did every day, you exercised at a certain time of the day, maybe you meditated, you ate certain foods at certain times of the day, to live a ritualistic life. For some people, they think it's boring, but if you look at success and you look at how did people actually get better, they mastered the mundane. They mastered the mundane. So my key point in what I've said so far is focus on self-actualizing. What does that really mean? It means find out what really makes you feel alive. Find out what you really feel that maybe you're put on this earth to do and get better at it. Whether it's better at communicating or cooking, or it could be anything, or exercising, or maybe you do martial arts yourself. Oh, by the way, just as an aside, one of the things I loved about Bruce Lee is what he had to go through to get his mastery. And again, this is something I know a fair bit about myself through my own trials and tribulations to get results and success in my life. And this is one of the things he loved. He loved adversity. He believed that everyone needed adversity, things that we need to go through in order to get stronger. And he read Abraham Maslow, the guy who was all into self-actualizing. And Bruce Lee quoted Abraham Maslow saying, Maslow said that our greatest learnings come through our greatest adversity, death, trauma, huge illness, setbacks. That's where people get stronger. So make adversity your ally. Because if you don't, then you're always going to fall short. Very, very powerful. And something else that he said, and again, I want to kind of really challenge you around this, is he used to say, knowledge is just overrated. There are so many people who know stuff, but they don't know how to apply stuff. Now, let me ask you, if you fell over and hurt yourself, would you want someone who knew first aid, or would you want someone who knew how to apply first aid? The same with a doctor, right? You might have the most enthusiastic person in the world who knows a lot of stuff. He was an applicator, and this is what I'm going to ask you to do, because he was also a massive fan of self-help. He said the only help is self-help, where you learn to administer first aid on yourself. You look to grow, you look to get better, you look to master the mundane. And I love the way that he overcame so much adversity, because there were so many things he was told not to do, but he had the burning desire to do it. So he had a burning desire to teach martial arts to all races, but he was told not to do that. He said, you must never do that. In fact, he was challenged by another Oriental person who came from another school or the same school of martial arts that Bruce Lee was teaching. And basically the battle was, if you lose to this man, you must stop teaching. And Bruce Lee agreed to it. But of course, he actually humiliated the person he was beating, and was then allowed, supposedly, to continue to do what he loved doing, which was teaching people to master themselves. And one of the greatest forms of mastery definitely has to be health, and has to be well-being. So another bit of adversity that he went through is that he wasn't prepared particularly well, and he was training one particular day, and he lifted a weight that was way too strong, and he did some serious damage to his spine. And he was told he'd probably never kick again. And basically he didn't really move very much for 6 months. And rather than, he had to deal with the reality of the situation that he was in. And this was something he was a massive fan of. Deal with the reality. It's adversity. What can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? And he loved to read. He believed that we all need to read, that we need to feed our brains, just like we feed our bodies. And he read so many great books. But one of the books that he read, that I am a massive fan of, and have taught the teachings of this book myself, Think and Grow Rich. And Think and Grow Rich was based on 500 interviews of the most successful people that have ever walked the face of the earth, or at least some of them. Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, pioneers of thinking. And the author spent all these years interviewing and speaking to them. And if you read the book, you really get an opportunity to learn about what makes people successful. And of course, Bruce Lee read this. And when it came to the bit about write down something that you want, and every single day, and also talk about something you want, but what you're prepared to sacrifice, what you're prepared to give for it. And go away and Google this. Google Bruce Lee, Think and Grow Rich, and you can come across this one-page thing that he wrote. In fact, my father-in-law, who loves Bruce Lee, showed me this thing that Bruce Lee actually wrote and read every single day. Now, the sad part is that obviously Bruce Lee is no longer here, and part of what he wrote down was to be the first massive Oriental star, the biggest in the world. And he did achieve that, but he never got to see it. And he also said to be earning $10 million a year by the year 1979. But what's so amazing is so much of what he wrote down, he applied. He said this to himself every single day. And what you think about, what you say, you can bring that around. He really understood it wasn't just about physical mastery. It was also about mental mastery. And he's someone who I believe should never be forgotten. And I believe that you should never be forgotten. I heard a colleague of mine say recently that, the legacy of your life should be that you leave an imprint. And that imprint will go away when you have not touched any more people in your life. But I might touch your life, and the person whose life you touch, they might not know who I am, but it doesn't matter. The legacy lives on. Your legacy, I believe, is to leave this world in a better place than you came here in. That's why the New Zealand rugby team, or at least one of the reasons why they are the most successful team ever, with a win ratio of over 80%. Because part of the process of being in that team is you leave that team in a better space than when you came here into the team. And that should be exactly the same thing for your life. So what's your biggest takeaway from Bruce Lee? What are you going to do? What could you apply to your life? It's my privilege to be able to share with you some of this wisdom that still exists. He invested his life into getting better. He learned from great teachers. He read books. That's what he's passed on to us, and it's up to us to pass that on to other people. The world needs you to be the very, very best that you can be. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a comment if you're listening to this on iTunes. Remember, this is now on Spotify. We're still in the top 10 podcasts in the world on news and noteworthy. We appreciate every single one of you. My goal is to inspire you to do something different than what you're currently doing today. So what are you going to do right now based on the back of this podcast? Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time. Have a happy, beautiful day. All the best.